2 summers ago, I sat in the 4th row of the Bernard Jacobs Theater on Broadway, waiting to see Parade, the Tony Award-winning revival starring Ben Platt. Though I came for the music and all too relevant story of Jewish hatred, I left with a feeling of hope and love I didn't expect to find in this bleak retelling. Parade tells the true story of Leo Frank, a Jewish factory superintendent in Atlanta who in 1913 was falsely accused and convicted of murdering a young girl. The trial was steeped in anti-Semitism, and in 1915, Leo Frank was lynched by a Jew-hating mob. More than 100 years later, on the opening preview night of the revival of the Broadway musical, neo-Nazis rallied outside of the theater, the same theater I found myself in that night. Though the streets were quiet the evening I went to see Parade, I felt my presence was an act of defiance. I was going to see this play, whether the neo-Nazis liked it or not. I felt myself harden. My defensive walls went up. However, throughout the play, I felt this piercing through my heart. And in the last moments, something happened that punctured my soul and broke down my walls, filling me with this bittersweet optimism. At the very end of the show, moments before his on-stage death, Leo Frank sings a Hebrew prayer. Upon hearing these words emerge from Ben Platt's lips, the audience gasped, seemingly as one, with one heart. Tears filled my eyes. More than the words he said, that collective gasp is what did it for me. And for one small moment, a collective recognition united us as one people with one heartbeat. I felt heard and seen as a Jew in a way I hadn't expected, in a way that cloaked me in hope and connection and love. What did he sing that provoked such a unified reaction? Leo Frank recited the Shema. It is a Jewish tradition to recite the Shema moments before death, but in this torturous scene, Frank's recitation of the Shema went beyond tradition. It was an act of defiance. He was going to die as Leo Frank, the Jew, who was wrongly convicted because of his Jewish identity. No one else was going to define his identity except for him. It is reminiscent of Rabbi Akiva's story, who famously recited the Shema while the Romans flayed him alive. He died while standing up for his right to practice Judaism in the face of oppression, in the face of death. These are the same words we read in this week's Torah portion. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. In this week's Torah portion, Va'at Hanan, Moses turns to the Israelites and says these words. For centuries, Jewish tradition has treated these words not as a commandment, but as an orientation, a way of life. We say them in the morning, we say them at night, we say them at the end of life, just as Leo Frank modeled. So, I've been wondering, what is it about this prayer that makes it so central to our people? Why is hearing this idea of Shema so important to our faith? Why does Moses begin not with obey or believe Israel, but Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel? The late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs clarifies a common misconception. Shema Yisrael does not mean hear, O Israel. It means something more like listen, concentrate, and strive to understand. Create a silence in the soul so that you might make out the still small voice beneath the noise. Psychotherapists nowadays sometimes speak of active listening, and this is part of what Shema means. In a world full of noise, the act of truly listening to another person, to ourselves, to history, it's rare and it's holy. I've been thinking about that collective gasp. Experiencing this collective intake of breath, this communal act of listening and understanding and feeling has made me wonder if the Shema is a call to listen not just to God, but to each other. Perhaps it asks, are you really listening? Can you hear one another's pain echoed in your own heart? Can you hear your neighbor in all their anguish and imperfection and not look away? It was Brené Brown who first taught me the difference between sympathy and empathy. Empathy is when we use that active listening. When someone is in a deep hole and they shout from the bottom, "I'm stuck. It's dark. I'm overwhelmed." When you respond with sympathy, you look down and you say, "Wow, gosh, it is dark down there." When you respond with empathy, you climb down into that hole and you're able to say, "I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone." In our increasingly demanding and busy lives, you may be thinking, "I don't have time for that. I have way too much going on." But a New York Times article from 2023 posed a simple, powerful question. Do you have 8 minutes? As Simon Sinek put it, when someone's struggling, they don't need advice. They need connection. And research shows that just 8 minutes of undivided attention can help someone keep going. 8 minutes. 8 minutes not to fix their problem and not to say the perfect thing. 8 minutes just to be there and to listen. What does this teach us? That listening is not a passive act. It's life-giving. This is what the Shema asks of us, to listen and perhaps believe that someone else will listen to us in return. Why else would we say the Shema before we go to sleep, not knowing what the night will bring? Why else would we say it before we die? Why else say it when we are afraid and we don't know what else to say? Because we are asking for someone, somewhere, to hear us, to listen to us, and to be there with us. Because the Shema reminds us that even when the world feels so broken, we are not alone. It says, I still believe in connection. And maybe that's all any of us really need sometimes. Not answers, not a Band-Aid, just someone to sit beside us and say, I hear you, and I'm not going anywhere. And that's the kind of comfort tradition offers. Not quick fixes, but presence. That's why Moses begins with the Shema. Not believe, not obey, but listen. Because listening is the first act of love. Jewish tradition teaches Olam Chesed Yibaneh, The world is built on love. But that love begins with listening. Not just hearing noise, but hearing truth, hearing pain, hearing hope. So tonight in this sacred gathering, let us treat listening as a spiritual act. Let us hear one another, not to fix, but to hold space, not to respond, but to remain. To listen is to say, you matter. I see you, and I'm still here. And maybe that's why at the end of parade, when Leo Frank says the Shema, the audience gasped. Because for one holy moment, we listened together. We bore witness. We stayed present despite the pain. And we remembered what it means to be human. Shabbat Shalom.